My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 29 years old, and last Thanksgiving I discovered what my family really thought of my military service. I had just returned from a classified mission overseas, still wearing my dress blues from the airport, when my younger brother Marcus looked me up and down and said, "Playing soldier again, I see. When are you going to get a real job like the rest of us?" The entire room fell silent, then erupted in uncomfortable laughter. What they didn't know was that 3 weeks later, I would be standing in the Oval Office while the President of the United States pinned the Medal of Honor to my chest. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. But to understand how we got to that moment, I need to take you back to where it all began. In the small town of Millbrook, Ohio, where the Mitchell family was known for three things: our hardware store, our Sunday barbecues, and our unshakable bond. Growing up in Millbrook was like living inside a Norman Rockwell painting. Our white two-story colonial sat on Maple Street, complete with a wraparound porch where my mother Linda would shell peas in the summer while keeping an eye on the neighborhood kids. My father, Robert Mitchell, had inherited Mitchell's hardware from his father, and it was the kind of place where farmers came not just for supplies but for coffee and conversation that could stretch for hours. I was the eldest of 3 children, with my brother Marcus 2 years younger and my sister Emma bringing up the rear at 25. From the time I could walk, I felt the weight of responsibility that comes with being the oldest. I helped Dad organize inventory at the hardware store, taught Marcus how to ride a bike when he was too embarrassed to let Dad help, and spent countless hours braiding Emma's hair for school photos and dance recitals. Our house was the gathering place for the entire extended family. Every Sunday after church, aunts, uncles, and cousins would descend upon our backyard for barbecues that lasted well into the evening. Dad would man the grill with military precision, a habit he'd picked up during his brief stint in the National Guard, while Mom orchestrated a feast that could feed half the town. Those Sundays were magic, filled with the sounds of children playing tag, adults arguing good-naturedly about politics and sports, and the eternal clatter of horseshoes hitting metal stakes. Marcus was always the entertainer at these gatherings. Even as a child, he had a gift for making people laugh, doing impressions of our teachers, or creating elaborate stories about his imaginary adventures. He was charming in a way that came naturally, the kind of kid who could talk his way out of trouble and into extra dessert with equal ease. I remember being secretly envious of how effortlessly he drew attention and affection from our relatives, while I was always the responsible one, who helped clean up and made sure the younger cousins didn't wander too far from the yard. Emma was our little princess, blessed with Mom's delicate features and a gentle spirit that made everyone want to protect her. She was the artist of the family, always drawing or painting, turning our refrigerator into a gallery of her latest creations. Marcus and I formed an unlikely alliance when it came to Emma. Despite our occasional sibling rivalry, we both took our role as her protectors seriously. My childhood was filled with traditions that seemed unbreakable. Every 4th of July, we'd spread blankets in Veterans Park to watch the fireworks, with Dad pointing out the different types of explosions and explaining the science behind the colors. Christmas mornings meant matching pajamas and a breakfast of Mom's famous cinnamon rolls before we could even think about presents. Summer evenings were spent catching fireflies in mason jars, only to release them before bedtime because Mom insisted it was cruel to keep them trapped. The hardware store was my second home. After school, I'd walk the 6 blocks from Millbrook Elementary to help Dad with inventory or assist customers who needed someone small enough to crawl into tight spaces to retrieve fallen bolts or screws. I loved the smell of sawdust and metal, the orderly rows of tools and supplies, and the way Dad knew every customer by name and could remember exactly what project they were working on from their last visit. Marcus showed no interest in the store, preferring to spend his afternoons at the community center playing basketball or hanging out with friends at the arcade. Dad never pushed him, saying that everyone needed to find their own path, but I could see the disappointment in his eyes when Marcus would decline invitations to help with weekend projects or deliveries. It was during one of those weekend deliveries that I first felt the pull towards something bigger than Millbrook. We were taking supplies to the National Guard Armory on the outskirts of town for a renovation project, and I watched in fascination as uniformed soldiers unloaded our truck with precision and purpose. Their movements were economical and coordinated, and there was something about their bearing that spoke to me on a level one couldn't quite articulate. "Dad," I asked on the drive home, "what was it like being in the Guard?" He was quiet for a long moment, his hands steady on the steering wheel. "It was the proudest I've ever been," he finally said. "Knowing that you're part of something bigger than yourself, that you're serving your country and your community, there's no feeling like it. I only wish I'd done more." That conversation planted a seed that would grow slowly over the next several years. I began paying more attention to news about the military, reading books about famous battles and military heroes. I joined the JROTC program when I got to high school, much to the amusement of Marcus, who called it playing dress-up and couldn't understand why I wanted to wake up early for drill practice. High school was where the first cracks in our family dynamic began to show. While I threw myself into academics and JROTC, earning the respect of my instructors and classmates, Marcus discovered his talent for making people laugh could be just as effective when the humor came at someone else's expense. He developed a sharp wit that could cut deep when he wanted it to, though he always claimed he was just joking when anyone called him out. Emma remained everyone's darling, floating through high school with decent grades and a growing reputation as the most talented artist in her class. She stayed out of the growing tension between Marcus and me, preferring to lose herself in her sketchbooks and painting easels. The tension came to a head during my senior year when I announced my intention to join the Army after graduation. The family dinner where I broke the news was one of the most uncomfortable meals of my life. Mom immediately started crying, worried about the dangers I'd face and how far away I'd be from home. Dad looked conflicted, torn between pride in my choice and fear for my safety. But it was Marcus's reaction that cut the deepest. He laughed, not the warm, infectious laugh that had charmed our relatives for years, but something cold and dismissive. "Sarah wants to play with guns now," he announced to the table. "I guess being the class president and JROTC commander wasn't enough attention for her." The words stung, because there was just enough truth in them to hurt. I had always been driven to excel, to stand out, to make my parents proud. But my desire to serve wasn't about attention. It was about something deeper, a calling I felt in my bones but couldn't adequately explain to my family. Dad tried to mediate, explaining that military service was honorable and that he was proud of my decision, but the damage was done. Marcus had planted a seed of doubt about my motivations that would grow and fester over the years to come. Despite the family tension, I graduated as valedictorian and enlisted in the Army with a delayed entry program that would allow me to leave for basic training in the fall. Those summer months before I left were bittersweet, filled with last hurrahs with high school friends and attempts to reconnect with Marcus, who seemed determined to maintain his distance. The night before I left for Fort Benning, the whole family gathered for what Mom called a going-away dinner, but felt more like a wake. She had made all my favorite foods, meatloaf with mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, and her legendary apple pie. We ate mostly in silence, the weight of my impending departure settling over the table like a heavy blanket. After dinner, Dad pulled me aside on the porch, where we'd spent so many evenings talking about everything and nothing. "You know I'm proud of you, right?" he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Your mother and I both are. We're scared, sure, but we're proud." Marcus appeared in the doorway just as Dad finished speaking. For a moment, I thought he might say something kind, might bridge the gap that had opened between us. Instead, he shook his head and said, "You're really going through with this soldier thing, huh? Hope it's everything you dreamed it would be." The dismissive tone in his voice made it clear that he expected military service to be a disappointment, a phase I'd grow out of once reality set in. As I hugged my family goodbye the next morning, Marcus's lukewarm embrace and casual "see you around" felt more like a dismissal than a farewell. Looking back now, I can see that moment as the beginning of a journey that would test not only my physical and mental limits, but also the bonds that I thought were unbreakable. I was 18 years old, full of determination and patriotic idealism, heading into a world that would challenge everything I thought I knew about myself, my family, and what it means to serve something greater than yourself. What I couldn't have predicted was how that service would change me, how it would create a gulf between the girl who left Millbrook and the soldier who would eventually return. Nor could I have imagined that my own brother's mockery and dismissal would become the soundtrack to my military career, playing in the background every time I faced a challenge or questioned my choice to serve. But perhaps most importantly, I had no idea that my determination to prove Marcus wrong would drive me to heights I never could have imagined, leading to a moment in the Oval Office that would change not just my life, but my family's understanding of what service really means. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Basic training at Fort Benning was a shock to my system in ways I never could have anticipated. The drill sergeants didn't care that I had been valedictorian or JROTC commander. On that first day, standing in formation with 63 other terrified recruits, I was just another face in the crowd, stripped of every identity marker that had defined me back home. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez was our senior drill instructor, a compact woman with steel-gray eyes and a voice that could cut through concrete. She had served 3 tours in Afghanistan and carried herself with the kind of quiet authority that made even the biggest, toughest recruits snap to attention. During our first meeting, she looked down the line of new soldiers and said something that would stick with me throughout my entire military career. You came here as individuals from different backgrounds, different families, different dreams. You'll leave here as soldiers, united by something stronger than blood, the bond of service to your nation. The physical challenges were brutal but manageable. I had always been athletic, playing soccer and running track in high school, so the long runs and obstacle courses pushed me but didn't break me. What surprised me was how much I thrived under the mental pressure. While other recruits cracked under the constant stress and scrutiny, I found myself adapting, even excelling. I discovered reserves of determination I didn't know I possessed. My bunkmate was a girl named Jessica Torres from East Los Angeles, whose tough exterior hid a sharp intelligence and fierce loyalty. She had joined the army to pay for college and escape a neighborhood where too many of her friends had been lost to gang violence. We formed an unlikely friendship, the small-town hardware store girl and the inner-city survivor, bonded by our shared determination to prove we belonged. You got that look, Jessica said one evening as we cleaned our rifles in the barracks. Like you're trying to prove something to somebody who ain't even here. She wasn't wrong. Every push-up, every mile run, every perfectly made bunk was partly motivated by an imaginary conversation with Marcus, where I could finally show him that my playing soldier was anything but a game. I wrote letters home religiously, describing my training and achievements, hoping to bridge the distance with words, since I couldn't be there in person. Mom's letters back were filled with news about the hardware store, Emma's latest art projects, and gentle questions about my well-being. Dad's notes were shorter but warmer, expressing pride in my progress and sharing memories of his own military service. But Marcus's communications were sporadic at best. A few text messages with generic responses to my detailed updates about training milestones. Graduation from basic training was one of the proudest moments of my life. Standing in formation in my dress blues, I felt transformed, not just physically stronger, but mentally tougher and more confident than I had ever been. My parents made the trip to Fort Benning for the ceremony, and seeing Dad's face as I marched past in formation made every difficult moment of the previous months worthwhile. Marcus hadn't come. Work obligations, Mom explained apologetically, but I could see the disappointment in her eyes, too. It was my first real achievement as a soldier, and my brother couldn't be bothered to witness it. After basic training came advanced individual training at Fort Gordon, where I specialized in military intelligence. The work fascinated me, learning to analyze enemy communications, interpret satellite imagery, and piece together complex puzzles that could save lives on the battlefield. I discovered I had a natural aptitude for languages, quickly picking up conversational Arabic and later Pashto. My instructors took notice of my performance. Captain Williams, a career intelligence officer with deployments across the Middle East, pulled me aside after a particularly challenging exercise. "Mitchell, you have something special," she said. "The ability to see patterns others miss, to think 3 steps ahead. Have you considered applying for Ranger School?" Ranger School, the elite training program that fewer than 40% of candidates completed successfully. It was grueling, dangerous, and until recently, had been closed to women entirely. The thought terrified and thrilled me in equal measure. When I called home to discuss the opportunity, the family reactions were predictably mixed. Dad was cautiously supportive, recognizing the honor but worried about the increased danger. Mom was tearful, begging me to reconsider. Emma was excited, already planning to brag to her art school friends about her soldier sister. Marcus's response was typically dismissive. So now regular army isn't enough for you? You need to be super soldier too? When does this need to prove yourself end, Sarah? His words stung because they echoed my own private doubts. Was I pushing myself to extremes to prove something to my family? Or was I genuinely called to serve at the highest level? After long conversations with Captain Williams and several sleepless nights, I decided to apply. If I was going to serve, I wanted to serve where I could make the biggest difference. Key plans. Ranger School at Fort Benning was a different kind of hell than basic training. For 62 days, I was pushed beyond every limit I thought I had. The Derby phase tested our small unit tactics and leadership under extreme sleep deprivation and physical stress. The mountain phase in Georgia's rugged terrain taught us to operate in harsh environments while carrying impossibly heavy loads. The Florida phase simulated jungle warfare with water obstacles, swamps, and psychological pressure designed to break even the strongest candidates. I was one of only 4 women in my class of 230 candidates. The attention was unwelcome but unavoidable. Every mistake was scrutinized, every success questioned. Some male candidates resented our presence, making snide comments about lowered standards and political correctness. Others were supportive, recognizing that we had earned our place through the same grueling selection process they had. The low point came during the mountain phase. I had been selected as a squad leader for a particularly challenging patrol, responsible for navigating treacherous terrain while coordinating with other units. Exhausted from days of minimal sleep and inadequate nutrition, I made a critical navigation error that led my squad off course. We missed our objective timeline by hours, forcing the entire exercise to be restructured. That night, as I sat alone reviewing maps and questioning every decision I had made, I thought about calling home. I imagined Marcus's reaction to hearing that I had failed, that maybe he had been right all along about my military ambitions being nothing more than an elaborate attention-seeking scheme. Instead, I called Jessica, who had completed her own training and was now stationed at Fort Hood. "You want to quit?" she asked after I explained what had happened. "I don't know," I admitted. "Maybe Marcus was right. Maybe I'm just trying to prove something that can't be proven." "Listen to me, Mitchell," Jessica said, using my last name the way drill sergeants had trained us to think of each other. "That brother of yours has been living in your head rent-free since basic training. You think every Ranger candidate doesn't make mistakes? You think every great soldier doesn't have moments of doubt? The difference is, most of them don't have family members actively rooting against their success." Her words hit like a physical blow because they crystallized something I had been avoiding. My family's lack of support, particularly Marcus's constant dismissal, had become a weight I carried into every challenge. Instead of motivating me, it was holding me back, making me second-guess decisions and question my instincts. The next morning, I requested a meeting with my Ranger instructor, Master Sergeant Collins, a decorated veteran with multiple combat deployments. I explained my navigation error and asked for honest feedback about my performance and potential. "Mitchell," he said, leaning back in his chair, "you made a mistake. It happens. What matters is how you respond. You can let it define you, or you can learn from it and become a better soldier. From what I've observed, you have the skills and determination to succeed here. The question is whether you believe it." That conversation marked a turning point. I stopped carrying my family's doubts into every exercise and started trusting my training and instincts. My performance improved dramatically, and I began to emerge as a natural leader among my fellow candidates. When other students struggled with complex tactical problems, they started coming to me for guidance. I graduated Ranger School in the top 15% of my class, earning the coveted Ranger tab that fewer than 3% of all soldiers would ever wear. The graduation ceremony was smaller than basic training, attended mostly by fellow soldiers and career military personnel who understood the significance of the achievement. My parents wanted to attend, but the timing conflicted with Marcus's engagement party to his longtime girlfriend, Rebecca Thompson. The choice, Mom explained apologetically, came down to logistics and family obligations. They couldn't make two major trips in the same month, and Marcus's engagement was a once-in-a-lifetime celebration. Standing in formation with my fellow Rangers, receiving the tab that represented months of the most challenging training in the military, I felt a complex mixture of pride and loneliness. I had achieved something remarkable, something that would define my military career, but the people who mattered most weren't there to witness it. Captain Williams attended the ceremony and pulled me aside afterward. "I've never seen a soldier develop as much as you have over the past year," she said. "You came here talented but uncertain. You're leaving as a leader. I hope you know how rare that transformation is." Her words meant more to me than she could have known. For the first time since leaving home, I felt truly confident in my choice to serve, not because I was trying to prove something to my family, but because I had proven something to myself. My first assignment after Ranger School was with the 75th Ranger Regiment at Fort Benning, where I would serve as an intelligence analyst supporting direct action missions. The work was classified, fast-paced, and exactly the kind of challenge I had been preparing for since that first conversation with Dad about military service. When I called home to share the news of my assignment, the responses followed their predictable patterns. Dad was proud but worried about the dangers of special operations work. Mom cried and made me promise to be careful. Emma was fascinated by the idea of classified missions and begged for details I couldn't share. Marcus's reaction was different this time, though still dismissive. "Ranger School. Special Ops. When does it end, Sarah? When do you stop trying to be something you're not and just settle down like a normal person?" The question revealed something I was only beginning to understand about my brother's perspective. To him, my military achievements weren't signs of personal growth or dedication to service. They were evidence of my inability to be satisfied with ordinary life, the kind of life he had chosen for himself. What Marcus didn't understand, and what I was only beginning to realize myself, was that I wasn't running from ordinary life. I was running towards something extraordinary, something that would test every limit I had and push me to become the person I was meant to be. The girl who had left Millbrook 18 months earlier was gone, replaced by a soldier who had earned her place among the military's elite through determination, sacrifice, and an unwavering commitment to excellence. As I prepared for my new assignment, I made a decision that would define the next phase of my military career. I stopped trying to make my family understand my choices and started focusing on being the best soldier I could be, regardless of their approval or disapproval. It was a liberation that would serve me well in the challenges ahead, though I had no idea just how severely those challenges would test not only my military skills, but also my relationship with the family I had left behind. My first deployment came 8 months after joining the 75th Ranger Regiment. We were heading to Afghanistan's Kunar province, one of the most dangerous regions in the country, where Taliban and al-Qaeda forces used the mountainous terrain to launch attacks on coalition forces. As our C-130 transport plane descended toward Bagram airfield, I pressed my face to the small window and saw a landscape that looked like another planet, brown, rocky, and unforgiving under the harsh Afghan sun. Forward Operating Base Chapman became my home for the next 12 months. It was a collection of prefabricated buildings, concrete barriers, and dust that seemed to coat everything within minutes of cleaning. The base housed approximately 800 personnel from various units, but the Rangers operated out of a separate compound with heightened security measures due to the classified nature of our missions. My role as an intelligence analyst put me at the center of every operation. I spent my days in a windowless room, filled with computer screens, satellite feeds, and communication equipment, piecing together intelligence that would keep my fellow soldiers alive. The work was intense and often frustrating, sifting through intercepted communications in multiple languages, analyzing drone footage for signs of enemy activity, and creating detailed briefings for mission commanders. The first time I watched a mission I had planned unfold in real time through drone cameras was both thrilling and terrifying. Seeing soldiers move through terrain I had studied for weeks, following routes I had recommended, brought home the weight of responsibility in a way no training exercise ever could. When they returned safely with their objectives accomplished, I felt a sense of pride and purpose that validated every difficult moment of the past 2 years. My team leader was Staff Sergeant Michael Rodriguez, a veteran of 4 previous deployments who had a reputation for bringing his soldiers home alive. He was initially skeptical about working with a female analyst, particularly one so new to the regiment, but my work quickly earned his respect. "Mitchell," he said after my 3rd successful mission brief, "you see things others miss. That pattern recognition they taught you in intelligence school, it's saving lives out here." The soldiers I supported began seeking my input on missions beyond what was formally required. They trusted my analysis, and that trust became the foundation for relationships that went deeper than professional courtesy. I was part of a brotherhood that transcended traditional military hierarchy, bound together by shared danger and mutual dependence. Communication with home during deployment was limited and often frustrating. The time difference meant that when I had opportunities to call, my family was either sleeping or busy with their daily routines. Internet connections were unreliable, making video calls nearly impossible. I relied primarily on emails and the occasional letter, trying to bridge an 8,000-mile gap with words that felt increasingly inadequate. Mom's emails were filled with hometown news and worried questions about my safety that I couldn't fully answer due to operational security requirements. Dad's messages were shorter but warmer, often including updates about the hardware store and memories of his own military service that helped him understand what I was experiencing. Emma's communications were sporadic but enthusiastic, usually including digital copies of her latest artwork and excited questions about life in Afghanistan. Marcus's contact was minimal and often delayed. When he did respond to my emails, his messages were brief and focused on his own life. Updates about his job at a marketing firm in Columbus, progress on wedding planning with Rebecca, and casual mentions of family gatherings I was missing. He never asked detailed questions about my deployment or acknowledged the nature of the work I was doing. The disconnect became particularly apparent when I shared news of receiving a commendation for my role in a successful hostage rescue mission. I had provided critical intelligence that allowed Rangers to locate and extract 2 captured aid workers before they could be moved to a more secure location. The operation had been complex and dangerous, requiring precise timing and coordination that depended heavily on my analysis of enemy communication patterns. Dad's response was immediate and proud, acknowledging both the achievement and the danger it represented. Mom's email was worried but supportive, asking if the commendation meant I would be safer or more at risk in future missions. Emma sent an excited message about bragging to her professors about her hero sister. Marcus's response came 3 weeks later. "Congrats on the award. Rebecca and I picked out wedding invitations last weekend. Hope you can make it to the ceremony if you're back in time." The casual dismissal of what had been one of the most significant achievements of my military career was painful, but it also crystallized something I had been reluctant to acknowledge. My brother wasn't just uninterested in my military service. He actively minimized it, treating my accomplishments as inconveniences that interfered with family events and normal life. The isolation from family became more pronounced as my deployment progressed. While other soldiers received care packages filled with hometown treats and letters from multiple family members, my packages were smaller and less frequent. Mom sent cookies and practical items like socks and toiletries, but there was nothing from Marcus or Emma. When I mentioned this to Jessica during one of our occasional phone calls, her response was characteristically blunt. "You're over there risking your life for their freedom, and they can't be bothered to send you a bag of candy? That's messed up, Mitchell." She wasn't wrong, but acknowledging it meant confronting the reality that my family's support for my military career was largely superficial. They were proud to tell neighbors that their daughter was serving overseas, but they didn't want to engage with the actual details of what that service entailed. The turning point came during a particularly difficult mission in the remote mountains of Kunar province. Intelligence indicated that a high-value target, a Taliban commander responsible for coordinating attacks on supply convoys, was meeting with local tribal leaders in a village accessible only by helicopter. The mission required Rangers to insert under cover of darkness, observe the meeting, and potentially capture or eliminate the target. I had spent weeks analyzing the target's communication patterns and movement habits. creating a detailed profile that predicted his most likely location and escape routes. The mission brief I prepared was thorough and confident, recommending specific insertion points and extraction plans based on my understanding of enemy capabilities. The mission went sideways almost immediately. The target had changed his security protocols, and the Rangers encountered heavier resistance than anticipated. What should have been a quick observation mission became a 6-hour firefight, in which 2 soldiers were seriously wounded, and the team was pinned down until reinforcements arrived. During the extended engagement, I monitored communications from the Tactical Operations Center, providing real-time intelligence updates and coordinating air support. For 6 hours, I listened to gunfire and urgent radio traffic, knowing that my friends and colleagues were fighting for their lives partly based on intelligence I had provided. When the team finally extracted with their wounded, I felt the weight of responsibility in a way that no training had prepared me for. My analysis had been accurate, but I hadn't anticipated the target's change in security procedures. The wounded soldiers recovered fully, and the mission was ultimately considered successful despite the complications, but the experience left me questioning every assumption and detail in my work. That night, I called home using the satellite phone reserved for emergencies. I needed to hear familiar voices, to remember why I was there and what I was fighting for. Mom answered, and her relief at hearing from me was immediate and genuine. "Sarah, honey, we've been worried. The news showed fighting in Afghanistan, and we didn't know if you were involved." I couldn't share operational details, but I could convey my emotional state. "It's been a difficult day, Mom. Sometimes this job is harder than I expected." "Do you want to come home?" she asked gently. "There's no shame in saying you've done enough." The question caught me off guard. Despite everything I had accomplished, despite the lives I had helped save, and the missions I had supported, my own mother saw my service as something I might want to abandon when it became challenging. "No, Mom, this is important work. I'm making a difference here." "I know you think you are, sweetheart, but you could make a difference at home, too. Marcus is doing well at his marketing job, and Emma is thriving in art school. There are lots of ways to contribute without being in danger." The comparison to Marcus stung. His marketing job, however successful, wasn't saving lives or protecting American interests overseas. But in my mother's mind, his safe, conventional career path was equivalent to my military service. When Marcus got on the phone, his response was more direct. "This whole soldier thing is getting old, Sarah. How long are you going to keep this up? You've proven whatever you needed to prove. Time to come home and have a normal life." The conversation ended with polite but strained goodbyes, leaving me more isolated than before I had called. Instead of providing comfort and support, contact with my family had reinforced their fundamental misunderstanding of my choice to serve. Over the remaining months of my deployment, I threw myself even deeper into my work. I volunteered for additional missions, extended my duty hours, and pursued every opportunity to improve my skills and knowledge. The Rangers I supported became my real family, people who understood the importance of what we were doing and who appreciated the sacrifices required to do it well. When my deployment ended, I had been awarded 2 more commendations and had been personally recommended for promotion by my commanding officer. I had participated in operations that saved dozens of American and Allied lives, disrupted enemy networks, and contributed to the overall mission success in one of Afghanistan's most challenging regions. But as I prepared to return home for leave before my next assignment, I realized that the distance between myself and my biological family had grown beyond just physical miles. I was returning as a different person than the one who had left, harder, more confident, and clear about my purpose in ways that my family would never understand. The Army had become more than my job. It was my calling, my identity, and my true home. What I didn't yet realize was that this growing sense of belonging to something my family couldn't comprehend would soon create conflicts that would test every relationship I had taken for granted since childhood. The soldier returning to Millbrook was not the same girl who had left 2 years earlier, and the family waiting for her had no idea how to bridge the gap that military service had created between them. The flight home from Afghanistan felt surreal, like traveling between 2 different worlds. As our transport plane descended toward Atlanta, I stared out at the green landscape below, so different from the brown mountains I'd called home for 12 months. The abundance of trees, the orderly grid of highways, and the absence of concrete barriers and guard towers struck me as almost alien after a year of war. Processing through the reception station took hours. Medical checks, equipment turn-in, and briefings about readjusting to civilian life that felt both necessary and inadequate. How do you prepare someone to switch from analyzing enemy communications and planning life-or-death missions to worrying about grocery shopping and traffic jams? I had 2 weeks of leave before reporting to my next assignment at Fort Bragg, where I would be working with Delta Force as a senior intelligence analyst. The promotion and new position represented a significant advancement in my career, but explaining the importance of special operations work to my family would be yet another challenge. The drive from Columbus to Millbrook gave me time to prepare mentally for seeing my family. The countryside looked exactly the same: rolling hills, farmhouses, and small towns that seemed frozen in time, but I felt like I was returning as a stranger, carrying experiences and perspectives that couldn't be easily translated into the comfortable world I had left behind. My parents were waiting on the front porch when I pulled into the driveway, and for a moment, it was like stepping back into one of those Norman Rockwell paintings from my childhood. Mom rushed down the steps to embrace me, tears streaming down her face, while Dad stood back with a proud but worried smile. The hug lasted longer than any I remembered, as if Mom was trying to convince herself I was really home and safe. "You look different," Dad said when it was his turn to hug me. "Older, more serious." He wasn't wrong. 12 months of deployment had changed me in ways that went beyond the additional muscle from military fitness routines, or the deeper tan from Afghan sun. I carried myself differently, spoke more carefully, and found myself constantly scanning environments for threats that didn't exist in small-town Ohio. "Where are Marcus and Emma?" I asked, looking toward the house. "Marcus is at work," Mom explained, "but he'll be here for dinner. Emma's driving down from Columbus after her classes. She's so excited to see you." The house felt smaller than I remembered, cluttered with decorative items that seemed unnecessary after months of living with only essential possessions. My old room had been partially restored for my visit, though Mom's crafting supplies still occupied one corner. She had made an effort to welcome me home, but the space felt more like a guest room than the bedroom where I'd grown up. That afternoon, I walked through downtown Millbrook, trying to reconnect with the place that had shaped my early years. The hardware store was busier than I expected, with Dad hiring 2 part-time employees to help manage the workload. Several customers recognized me and offered thanks for my service, though their comments often revealed how little they understood about what that service actually entailed. "Playing Army overseas, I heard," said Mr. Peterson, a regular customer who had known me since childhood. "Must be nice seeing exotic places on the government's dime." I smiled politely and didn't correct his assumption that deployment was some kind of taxpayer-funded vacation. These interactions reminded me why I had often felt restless in Millbrook even before joining the military. The town's comfortable insularity, which had once felt secure, now seemed limiting and naive. Emma arrived that evening in a burst of energy and excitement, throwing herself into my arms with the enthusiasm she'd shown as a child. At 23, she had grown into a confident young woman, but her excitement at seeing me felt genuine and unmarked by the complications that had developed with Marcus. "I've been telling everyone at school about my sister the Ranger," she said proudly. "Professor Martinez wants to do a whole series of paintings about women in combat. He's been asking if you'd be willing to be interviewed for his research." Her enthusiasm was infectious and reminded me of the unconditional support that had once existed throughout our family. Emma wanted to hear stories about Afghanistan, asked thoughtful questions about the work I'd done, and seemed genuinely interested in understanding my experiences rather than dismissing them. Marcus arrived just before dinner, still wearing his business suit and carrying the confident demeanor that had served him well in his marketing career. At 27, he had filled out from the lanky teenager I remembered, and his success at work had given him a polish that was immediately apparent. Well, he said as he walked through the door, "the warrior returns. How many countries did you liberate while you were gone?" The sarcastic tone was familiar, but there was an edge to it that felt sharper than his usual teasing. His hug was perfunctory, more obligation than affection, and he immediately shifted his attention to discussing wedding plans with our parents. Dinner conversation focused primarily on Marcus and Rebecca's upcoming wedding. which was planned for the following month. They had chosen a venue at a country club in Columbus, hired a band, and planned what sounded like an elaborate celebration for 200 guests. The excitement in my parents' voices as they discussed details was unmistakable. This was the kind of family milestone they understood and could fully embrace. "Sarah's leave timing works out perfectly," Mom said. "She'll be home for the wedding before reporting to her new assignment." "Where is the new assignment?" Dad asked, showing genuine interest. "Fort Bragg, North Carolina. I'll be working with Special Operations Forces as a senior intelligence analyst." Marcus looked up from his phone, where he had been scrolling through something work-related. "Special Operations? Isn't regular Army special enough anymore? How many levels of elite do you need to feel important?" The comment hung in the air like a challenge. Emma looked uncomfortable, and my parents exchanged glances that suggested this wasn't the first time Marcus had made such remarks about my military career. "It's not about feeling important," I replied evenly. "It's about serving where my skills can make the biggest difference. Special Operations Forces handle the most sensitive and dangerous missions." "Right," Marcus said, his tone dripping with skepticism. "And I'm sure they desperately needed someone from Millbrook, Ohio to save the world." "What exactly did you do over there that was so critical?" The question was loaded with dismissive assumptions, but it also presented an opportunity to help him understand the reality of my service. I chose my words carefully, mindful of operational security restrictions but wanting to convey the importance of the work. I analyzed intelligence that helped locate high-value targets and plan missions that saved American lives. The work required language skills, pattern recognition, and cultural understanding that took months to develop. "Sounds like a fancy way of saying you sat behind a computer," Marcus replied. "Not exactly storming beaches or raising flags on Iwo Jima." His casual dismissal of my deployment experience was breathtaking in its ignorance and cruelty. For 12 months I had worked 18-hour days in a war zone, making split-second decisions that affected the safety of soldiers in combat. I had listened to gunfights in real time, coordinated air support for troops under fire, and provided intelligence that had directly contributed to successful missions. But in Marcus's mind, because I wasn't physically carrying a rifle into combat, my service was somehow less valuable or meaningful than the Hollywood version of warfare he had in his head. "Marcus," Dad intervened, "your sister's work was important and dangerous. She deserves respect for her service." "Of course it was important," Marcus replied, holding up his hands in mock surrender. "I'm sure sitting in air-conditioned buildings analyzing data was very challenging. I just think there are other ways to contribute to society that don't require running off to foreign countries and missing family events." The conversation shifted to safer topics, but the damage was done. Marcus had made his position clear. He viewed my military service as an extended adventure that took me away from family obligations rather than a meaningful contribution to national security. Over the following days, the tension continued to build. Marcus and Rebecca were consumed with wedding preparations, and every conversation seemed to circle back to their upcoming celebration. They discussed vendors, guest lists, and honeymoon plans, with an intensity that made it clear this event was the center of their universe. Meanwhile, my attempts to share experiences from deployment were met with polite but limited interest. Mom asked careful questions about my safety and living conditions, but seemed uncomfortable with details about the actual work. Dad was more engaged but clearly struggled to reconcile his pride in my achievements with his worry about the dangers I faced. Emma remained enthusiastic about my service, but she was busy with her final semester of art school and preparing for graduation. Her support was genuine, but limited by her own obligations and her natural desire to avoid family conflict. The breaking point came during a family dinner at a local restaurant to celebrate my homecoming. Marcus had been drinking wine throughout the meal and seemed determined to provoke a confrontation about my career choices. "So Sarah," he said as we waited for dessert, "when does this military phase end? When do you settle down and have a normal life like the rest of us?" The question assumed that my military career was temporary, a phase one would eventually outgrow rather than a chosen profession. It also implied that his definition of normal life was the standard by which all other choices should be measured. "This isn't a phase, Marcus. It's my career. I'm good at it, and it matters." "Matters to who?" he pressed. "You're missing birthdays, holidays, family events. Rebecca and I have been together for 3 years, and you've met her maybe 5 times because you're always deployed somewhere, or training for deployment somewhere. He wasn't entirely wrong about my limited presence at family events, but his framing ignored the reasons for my absence and the importance of the work that kept me away. "I'm serving my country," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "Some sacrifices are necessary when you're part of something bigger than yourself." Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Serving your country. Right. Because the rest of us are just selfish civilians who don't understand sacrifice." The implication that I thought myself superior to my family was painful because it was so far from the truth. I had never looked down on their choices, or suggested that civilian careers were less important. But Marcus seemed determined to frame my military service as an implicit criticism of his own life path. "I've never said that," I replied. "I've never suggested that what you do isn't important." "You don't have to say it," Marcus shot back. "It's in everything you do. The uniforms, the awards, the dangerous missions. It's all designed to make the rest of us feel small, by comparison." The accusation was so unfair, and so completely contrary to my motivations, that I found myself speechless. I had joined the military to serve something greater than myself, not to diminish my family's accomplishments. But Marcus had constructed a narrative in which my success was inherently threatening to his own self-worth. The dinner ended in uncomfortable silence, with my parents desperately trying to smooth over the conflict and Emma looking mortified by her brother's behavior. As we drove home, I realized that the distance between Marcus and me had grown beyond simple misunderstanding. He actively resented my military career and the recognition it brought, viewing my service as a personal attack on his own choices. What I didn't yet understand was that his resentment would soon escalate into something much more damaging, setting the stage for a confrontation that would change our family forever. Marcus and Rebecca's wedding day arrived with the kind of perfect weather that seems ordained for fairy tale celebrations. The morning dawned clear and bright, with a gentle breeze that would keep the outdoor ceremony comfortable for the 200 guests who had traveled from across Ohio and neighboring states to witness their union. I had spent the previous week helping with final preparations, trying to be the supportive sister Marcus claimed I never was. I arranged flowers, confirmed vendor deliveries, and even used my military logistics training to create detailed timelines for the day's events. Despite our recent tensions, I wanted his wedding to be perfect. Part of me hoped that my visible effort to prioritize his special day might finally bridge the growing gap between us. The morning preparations took place at the country club, with the bridal party occupying a suite of rooms overlooking the golf course where the ceremony would be held. Rebecca had asked me to be a bridesmaid, though I suspected the invitation came more from social obligation than genuine desire for my participation. Her actual bridesmaids were college friends and coworkers who shared her world of marketing events and weekend shopping trips. As I helped Rebecca into her elaborate wedding dress, she seemed nervous in a way that went beyond typical pre-wedding jitters. She had always been polite to me, but distant, and I suspected that Marcus's complaints about my military career had influenced her perception of me. "You look beautiful," I told her honestly as we adjusted her veil. The dress was stunning, all ivory silk and delicate beadwork that had cost more than my monthly army salary. "Thank you," she replied, then hesitated before adding, "I'm glad you could make it home for this. Marcus was worried you'd get deployed again or have some military obligation that would keep you away." The comment revealed how Marcus had framed my absence from previous family events, not as the demands of military service, but as choices I made to avoid family responsibilities. I chose not to correct her on what would be her wedding day, but the mischaracterization stung. The ceremony was held in the country club's garden, with guests seated in elegant white chairs, facing an arbor decorated with roses and baby's breath. I took my place in the processional, wearing the burgundy dress Rebecca had selected for her bridesmaids, and watched as friends and family filled the seats. My parents sat in the front row, Dad looking distinguished in his best suit, and Mom dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief before the ceremony even began. Emma was there with her art school boyfriend, looking radiant in a flowing dress she had designed herself. Extended family filled the middle rows, aunts, uncles, and cousins I hadn't seen since before my deployment. As the music began and Rebecca started down the aisle on her father's arm, I found myself genuinely moved by the ceremony, despite my complicated feelings about Marcus. Watching my brother's face as he saw his bride approaching, seeing the joy and love in his expression, reminded me of the little boy who had once looked up to me with uncomplicated admiration. The ceremony itself was traditional and heartfelt, with vows that spoke of lifelong commitment and shared dreams. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, The applause was thunderous, and even I felt tears in my eyes. Whatever our conflicts, Marcus was my brother, and I wanted him to be happy. The reception began with cocktails on the terrace, followed by dinner in the country club's main dining room. The space was elegantly decorated with cream linens, gold accents, and centerpieces that perfectly matched Rebecca's vision of sophisticated romance. As one of the bridesmaids, I was seated at the head table with a clear view of the entire celebration. The dinner conversation at our table was polite but stilted. Rebecca's college friends chatted about mutual acquaintances and career updates, while her work colleagues discussed marketing campaigns and office politics. I found myself mostly listening, unable to contribute much to conversations about client presentations and weekend shopping trips. During the meal, several guests approached to thank me for my military service. These interactions were generally well-meaning, but often awkward, with people struggling to find appropriate words for experiences they couldn't really comprehend. "Thank you for keeping us safe," said Rebecca's aunt, a comment that always made me uncomfortable because it reduced complex geopolitical situations to simple platitudes. "Must be exciting, all that travel," added a family friend, apparently unaware that military deployment involved considerably more danger and hardship than vacation tourism. I accepted these comments graciously, but they reinforced my sense of being an outsider at what should have been a family celebration. My military service had become something that marked me as different, something that people acknowledged but didn't really want to understand. The real trouble began during the reception's formal toasts. Rebecca's father spoke movingly about gaining a son and Marcus's potential as a husband. My father delivered a heartfelt speech about watching his son grow into a man of character and integrity. Friends shared amusing stories about the couple's courtship and predictions for their future happiness. Then came Marcus's speech. As the groom, he was expected to thank the guests and express his love for his new wife. He began conventionally enough, thanking both sets of parents for their support and the wedding party for their participation. He spoke eloquently about his love for Rebecca and his excitement for their future together. But then his tone shifted as his gaze found me at the head table. "I also want to thank my sister Sarah for making it home for our wedding," he said, his voice carrying an edge that made me immediately wary. "It's not often we get to see her, since she's usually off on some important military mission that's more crucial than family events." The comment drew uncomfortable laughter from guests who weren't sure whether it was meant as affectionate teasing or genuine criticism. I felt my face flush as 200 pairs of eyes turned toward me, but I maintained my composure and managed a tight smile. Marcus wasn't finished. "Sarah joined the Army right after high school, determined to save the world one classified mission at a time. She's earned all sorts of medals and commendations for her service, which I'm sure makes her feel very important." The words, "feel very important," were delivered with unmistakable sarcasm, and the room began to sense that this wasn't typical wedding humor. Several guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, and I saw my parents exchange worried glances. "Of course, we're all very proud of Sarah's military career," Marcus continued, his voice growing louder and more pointed, "even if it means she's missed most of the important moments in our family's life over the past few years. Birthdays, holidays, graduations. But I suppose saving democracy takes precedence over showing up for your family." The room had gone almost completely silent now, with only the soft clink of silverware against plates breaking the tension. Rebecca was staring at her new husband with an expression of horror, clearly realizing that his speech had veered far from what they had discussed. "But tonight," Marcus said, raising his champagne glass, "tonight she managed to fit us into her busy schedule of being a hero. So let's all raise our glasses to Sarah, who finally decided that her little brother's wedding was worthy of her attention." The toast was devastating in its casual cruelty, delivered with a smile that made it sound like affectionate ribbing to anyone who didn't know the context of our recent conflicts. But every person at that head table could hear the genuine malice beneath his words, the years of resentment and jealousy finally erupting in the most public possible forum. Some guests raised their glasses out of confusion or social obligation, while others sat frozen in their seats, uncertain how to respond to such an obviously inappropriate toast. I felt every eye in the room on me, waiting to see how I would react to being publicly humiliated by my own brother at his wedding. For a moment, I considered standing up and walking out. Every instinct I had developed through military training told me to remove myself from a hostile situation, to avoid escalating a conflict that could only get worse. But this was my family, and Marcus was my brother, regardless of how he was treating me. Instead, I raised my own glass and stood up, my military bearing helping me project confidence I didn't feel. "To Marcus and Rebecca," I said, my voice clear and steady despite the turmoil inside me. "May your marriage be filled with the kind of love and loyalty that I've always tried to show my family, even when it wasn't reciprocated." The pointed reference to loyalty made my meaning clear to anyone paying attention, but I delivered it with a smile that maintained the pretense of wedding celebration. I took a sip of champagne, set down my glass, and remained standing as the room erupted in confused applause. Marcus's expression had shifted from smug satisfaction to uncertainty as he realized that his attempt to publicly humiliate me had backfired. My response had been gracious enough to avoid creating a scene, but pointed enough to make clear that I wouldn't accept his treatment without consequence. As the applause died down and guests began returning to their conversations, I excused myself from the head table and walked toward the ladies' room, needing a moment to collect myself before facing the remainder of the reception. My hands were shaking with suppressed anger and hurt, but I was determined not to let Marcus see how deeply his words had affected me. In the quiet of the bathroom, I stared at my reflection in the ornate mirror and tried to process what had just happened. My own brother had used his wedding speech as an opportunity to attack my military service and question my commitment to family. He had done it in front of 200 people, including extended family members who would carry this story for years to come. What made it even more painful was the realization that this wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment or wedding day nerves. This was the culmination of years of growing resentment that Marcus had finally chosen to express in the most hurtful way possible. When I returned to the reception, several guests approached me with expressions of sympathy and confusion. My parents looked mortified, Emma appeared close to tears, and even some of Rebecca's family members seemed embarrassed by what had transpired. "Honey," my mother said, pulling me aside, "Marcus didn't mean anything by that. You know how he gets when he's nervous. He was just trying to be funny." But we both knew it wasn't true. Marcus had meant every word, and his wedding day had simply provided him with a captive audience for expressing feelings he had been harboring for years. The rest of the reception passed in a blur of forced smiles and uncomfortable conversations. I stayed until the appropriate time for departure, maintaining my dignity and fulfilling my obligations as a bridesmaid, but inside I was already making a decision that would change my relationship with my family forever. As I watched Marcus and Rebecca cut their cake, share their first dance, and accept congratulations from their guests, I realized that the little brother I had once adored was gone, replaced by a man who saw my achievements as personal attacks and my service as selfishness. The war that had been building between us for years had finally erupted into open hostility, and I knew there would be no going back to the way things used to be. The morning after Marcus's wedding, I left Millbrook without saying goodbye to anyone except my parents. The public humiliation at the reception had crystallized something that had been building for years. My family, led by Marcus, had fundamentally misunderstood and dismissed my military service. More painfully, they seemed to actively resent the recognition and respect it had earned me. Mom tried to smooth things over at breakfast, insisting that Marcus hadn't meant his comments maliciously and that wedding stress had simply gotten the better of him. But Dad's expression told a different story. He had served briefly in the National Guard and understood that Marcus's speech had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. "Your brother was wrong," Dad said quietly as he walked me to my car. "What he said last night was inexcusable. You've served your country with honor, and you deserve better from your family." His words meant more to me than he probably realized, but they also highlighted how isolated I had become within my own family. Dad understood and respected my service, but he was clearly reluctant to confront Marcus directly about his behavior. The drive from Ohio to North Carolina gave me 8 hours to process what had happened and prepare mentally for the next phase of my military career. Fort Bragg was home to some of the Army's most elite units, including Delta Force, and my new assignment would be the most challenging and sensitive work of my career to date. As I drove through the rolling hills of Virginia, I made a decision that would define my relationship with my family for years to come. I would stop trying to bridge the gap that Marcus had widened into a chasm. I would fulfill my obligations as a daughter and sister, but I would no longer invest emotional energy in relationships that brought me more pain than support. Fort Bragg was massive, sprawling across more than 160,000 acres and housing over 50,000 soldiers and family members. The base buzzed with the controlled energy of multiple elite units conducting training and operations around the clock. Unlike my previous assignments, everything at Bragg operated at a heightened level of intensity and precision. My new unit, officially designated as the Intelligence Support Activity, was housed in a nondescript building that could have been mistaken for corporate offices if not for the extensive security measures surrounding it. The work we did there was so classified that most of the soldiers on base had no idea what happened inside those walls. Colonel Patricia Hayes, my new commanding officer, was a legend in military intelligence circles. She had served multiple tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, earned a Purple Heart for wounds sustained during a reconnaissance mission, and had been personally recruited by Delta Force leadership for her analytical capabilities. "Sergeant First Class Mitchell," she said during our initial meeting, using my newly promoted rank. "Your record is impressive. Ranger School, successful deployment, commendations for analytical work. But this assignment will test you in ways your previous experience hasn't prepared you for." She wasn't exaggerating. The mission sets we supported were unlike anything I had encountered in conventional units. Instead of analyzing general enemy movements or communication patterns, we focused on specific high-value targets, whose capture or elimination could dramatically impact ongoing operations. My primary responsibility was leading a team of 3 junior analysts in developing detailed profiles of terrorist leaders operating in multiple theaters. We tracked their personal habits, family connections, communication methods, and security protocols, creating comprehensive intelligence packages that enabled special operations teams to plan surgical strikes with minimal collateral damage. The work required skills I had been developing throughout my military career: language proficiency, cultural understanding, pattern recognition, and the ability to synthesize complex information into actionable intelligence. But it also demanded a level of precision and attention to detail that was literally life or death. A mistake in our analysis could result in mission failure, civilian casualties, or the death of American soldiers. My team included Staff Sergeant Michael Chen, a former linguist with expertise in Middle Eastern dialects; Sergeant Jennifer Walsh, a communications specialist who could identify individual voices from intercepted audio; and Specialist David Kim, a computer analyst whose technical skills complemented our human intelligence capabilities. Working with this team reminded me why I had fallen in love with military service in the first place. We were united by a common mission that transcended personal differences or civilian concerns. Our success was measured not by quarterly profits or social media followers, but by missions accomplished and lives saved. The pace of operations at Fort Bragg was relentless. We often worked 18-hour days when time-sensitive intelligence required immediate analysis. I would arrive at the office before sunrise and leave well after dark, grabbing meals from the base cafeteria and surviving on coffee and determination. Despite the demanding schedule, I thrived in this environment. The work was intellectually challenging, strategically important, and provided immediate feedback in the form of successful missions. When our intelligence led to the capture of a bomb maker responsible for attacks on American convoys, or when our analysis helped rescue hostages from terrorist compounds, the sense of purpose was overwhelming. Communication with my family during this period was minimal and increasingly strained. The classified nature of my work meant I couldn't share details about what I was doing, leading to conversations that felt hollow and disconnected. When family members asked about my job, I could only offer vague responses about intelligence analysis that seemed to confirm their suspicions that my military career was somehow less substantial than civilian employment. Marcus and Rebecca sent a generic thank you card for attending their wedding, with no acknowledgement of the scene he had created during his speech. The card included professional photos from their honeymoon in Italy, images of them smiling at famous landmarks and enjoying romantic dinners that seemed to exist in a different universe from my world of classified briefings and operational planning. Emma continued to be supportive, sending regular emails with updates about her final semester of art school and questions about my new assignment. Her interest was genuine, but the security restrictions made it impossible to share the aspects of my work that would have helped her understand its significance. Mom's communications were filled with local news and gentle pressure to visit home more frequently. She seemed to interpret my limited contact as evidence that I was pulling away from the family, rather than recognizing that my work schedule and the emotional aftermath of Marcus's wedding speech made regular communication difficult. Dad's messages were shorter but more understanding. His military background helped him recognize that my new assignment was likely demanding and important, even if I couldn't share specifics. He didn't pressure me for visits or detailed updates, instead sending brief notes of support that meant more to me than longer messages from other family members. The first major operation that relied heavily on my team's analysis came 3 months into my assignment. Intelligence indicated that a high-value target responsible for coordinating attacks against coalition forces was planning to meet with financial supporters in a remote compound in Syria. For 2 weeks, we worked around the clock developing a comprehensive intelligence package. We analyzed intercepted communications to confirm the target's identity and predict his travel patterns. We studied satellite imagery to understand the compound's layout and identify potential escape routes. We researched the backgrounds of everyone expected to attend the meeting, creating detailed profiles that would help operators distinguish between legitimate targets and civilians. The night of the operation, our entire team remained in the Tactical Operations Center, monitoring communications and providing real-time intelligence updates to the strike team. For 6 hours, we watched the mission unfold through drone cameras and listened to radio communications, making split-second adjustments to the operational plan based on changing conditions on the ground. The mission was a complete success. The target was captured alive, along with detailed financial records that would enable follow-up operations against his network. No civilians were harmed, and all operators returned safely to base. Most importantly, the intelligence gathered during the raid led to the disruption of planned attacks that would have killed dozens of American and Allied personnel. Colonel Hayes called our team into her office the next morning to debrief the operation. "Your analysis was flawless," she said, reviewing our performance metrics. "The precision of your intelligence enabled a textbook operation with maximum strategic impact and minimal risk." The commendation that followed was my third major award in 4 years of service, recognizing not just my individual performance, but also my leadership of the analytical team. The citation specifically noted our role in preventing terrorist attacks and saving American lives, achievements that represented the highest purpose of military intelligence work. But when I called home to share news of the commendation, the family response was predictably lukewarm. Mom was pleased but worried that awards meant I was involved in dangerous work. Dad was proud but focused on when I might be able to visit home again. Emma was excited and asked questions I couldn't answer due to classification restrictions. Marcus didn't respond to my message about the award for over a week. When he finally called, his conversation was entirely focused on his work promotion to senior account manager and his plans to purchase a house with Rebecca. He mentioned my commendation only in passing, with a comment about, quote, "another medal for the collection," that made clear he viewed my military achievements as meaningless accumulation rather than recognition for significant service. The contrast between my professional and personal life had become stark and painful. At work, I was respected as a subject matter expert whose analysis directly contributed to national security objectives. My opinions were sought by senior officers, my leadership was valued by junior personnel, and my achievements were recognized through formal awards and career advancement. At home, I was viewed as someone who had chosen an unconventional path that took her away from family obligations. My accomplishments were minimized, my service was misunderstood, and my brother actively resented the recognition my military career had brought. This disconnect was reinforced every time I returned to Millbrook for brief visits. The town that had once felt like home now seemed small and limiting, filled with people whose concerns felt trivial compared to the life and death decisions I faced daily at work. Conversations about local gossip, weather, and minor workplace drama felt disconnected from the reality of global threats and strategic operations that defined my professional world. During one particularly difficult phone call with Marcus, where he had complained about my missing yet another family gathering due to work obligations, I finally articulated something I had been feeling for months. "Marcus, I'm not trying to avoid family events. I'm not choosing work over family out of selfishness. I'm part of something important here, something that matters on a scale you don't seem to understand or respect." His response was immediate and cutting. "There you go again. acting like what you do is more important than what the rest of us do. Your job isn't more meaningful than mine just because you wear a uniform. The conversation ended badly, with both of us frustrated and angry, but it crystallized the fundamental disconnect between us. I wasn't claiming that military service was inherently superior to civilian careers. I was asking for recognition that my work was meaningful and important, not the elaborate attention-seeking scheme Marcus had convinced himself it was. As my first year at Fort Bragg drew to a close, I had established myself as one of the unit's most valuable analysts and earned the respect of colleagues whose opinions I valued. But the distance between my military family and my biological family had grown to the point where I wondered if it could ever be bridged. What I didn't know was that the mission that would define my entire military career was already being planned, and that my role in its success would soon force my family to confront their fundamental misunderstanding of what my service actually meant. The briefing that would change my life forever took place on a gray Tuesday morning in February, 18 months into my assignment at Fort Bragg. Colonel Hayes had called an emergency meeting in the secure conference room, the kind of gathering that meant either exceptional intelligence had surfaced or an operation of unusual importance was being planned. As my team filed into the room alongside senior officers from Delta Force and other special operations units, the tension was palpable. These weren't routine briefings about ongoing operations. The presence of so many high-ranking personnel indicated something significant was developing. "Ladies and gentlemen," Colonel Hayes began, her voice carrying the gravity that preceded major announcements. "We have received intelligence about a planned terrorist attack that could result in mass casualties on American soil. The specificity and credibility of this intelligence demands immediate action." The details that followed were chilling. A cell of highly trained operatives, funded by a coalition of terrorist organizations, had infiltrated the United States and was planning coordinated attacks on multiple targets during the upcoming Memorial Day weekend. The intelligence suggested attacks on a major sporting event, a transportation hub, and a government facility, timed to maximize both casualties and symbolic impact. "The challenge," Colonel Hayes continued, "is that our intelligence is fragmentary. We know the general timeframe and target categories, but we don't have specific locations, operational details, or complete identification of the operatives involved." This was where my team's expertise became critical. We specialized in taking incomplete intelligence and developing it into actionable information that could enable successful operations. But the timeline was brutal. We had less than 3 weeks to identify specific targets, locate the operatives, and develop plans for neutralizing the threat. "Sergeant First Class Mitchell," Colonel Hayes said, turning to me, "I'm assigning your team as the lead analytical unit for this operation. You'll have access to every intelligence resource we have, unlimited operational support, and direct communication with National Security Council staff. This is the most important assignment any of you will ever receive." The weight of responsibility was staggering. Thousands of American lives potentially hung in the balance, and the success or failure of the operation would depend heavily on our ability to analyze intelligence and provide accurate guidance to the operators who would execute the mission. Over the next 72 hours, my team worked around the clock, sleeping in shifts on cots set up in our office and surviving on catered meals and endless cups of coffee. We established a rhythm of intensive analysis punctuated by briefings with operational planners and updates to senior leadership. The initial intelligence came from multiple sources: intercepted communications, financial transaction records, surveillance footage from border crossings, and human intelligence from assets overseas. Our job was to synthesize these disparate pieces into a coherent picture of the planned attacks. Staff Sergeant Chen focused on communications intercepts, using his language skills to analyze coded conversations between suspected operatives. Sergeant Walsh applied her audio analysis expertise to identify individual voices and establish communication patterns. Specialist Kim developed algorithms to track financial transactions and identify suspicious patterns that might reveal operational funding. My role was to coordinate our efforts and synthesize our findings into intelligence products that could guide operational planning. But as the lead analyst, I also needed to make the crucial connections between seemingly unrelated pieces of information, identifying patterns that might escape notice during focused analysis of individual intelligence streams. The breakthrough came on the fourth day, when Kim discovered an anomaly in credit card transactions that initially seemed insignificant. A series of purchases at sporting goods stores across 3 states showed a pattern that suggested the operatives were acquiring equipment for multiple simultaneous operations. "Look at this," Kim said, projecting his analysis onto the main screen. "These purchases are all under different names, but they're using credit cards linked to the same offshore account. And the timing suggests coordination, all purchases made within a 48-hour window." Chen's communications analysis supported Kim's financial intelligence. "I've been tracking cell phone communications between numbers in the same geographic areas where these purchases were made. The conversations are coded, but the frequency and timing suggest operational coordination." Walsh's voice analysis provided the final piece of the puzzle. "I've isolated 3 distinct voices from the intercepted communications. Cross-referencing with immigration databases, I think I can identify at least 2 of the operatives." As we compiled our findings, a picture began to emerge of a sophisticated operation, involving at least 6 highly trained operatives who had entered the country through different border crossings over the previous 3 months. The financial intelligence suggested they were well-funded and had been planning their attacks for an extended period. But the most critical intelligence came from analyzing the pattern of their reconnaissance activities. By correlating their locations with major events scheduled for Memorial Day weekend, we could predict their most likely targets. Based on the pattern analysis, I briefed Colonel Hayes and the operational commanders. "We believe the primary targets are the Indianapolis 500, Union Station in Washington, D.C., and the Federal Building in Oklahoma City. The timing suggests coordinated attacks designed for maximum media impact and symbolic significance." The operational planning that followed was intense and complex. Delta Force teams would need to simultaneously assault multiple locations while ensuring the safety of thousands of civilians. The margin for error was essentially 0. Any mistake could result in mass casualties or allow operatives to escape and attempt their attacks. My team continued providing intelligence support as the operational plans developed. We refined our target identification, developed detailed profiles of each suspected operative, and created contingency plans for various scenarios the operators might encounter. The night before the operation, Colonel Hayes pulled me aside for a private conversation. "Mitchell, I want you to understand something. Your analysis has been exceptional throughout this operation. The precision and accuracy of your intelligence work has enabled us to plan an operation that could save thousands of American lives." Her words were gratifying, but they also reinforced the enormous pressure we were all feeling. Success would mean preventing a terrorist attack that could have rivaled 9/11 in its impact. Failure could result in one of the worst domestic terrorist attacks in American history. The operation itself took place over 12 hours on the Friday before Memorial Day weekend. 3 Delta Force teams conducted simultaneous raids in Indianapolis, Washington, and Oklahoma City, while FBI agents arrested support personnel in coordinating actions across multiple states. From the Tactical Operations Center at Fort Bragg, my team monitored communications and provided real-time intelligence updates to the operators in the field. We watched through drone cameras and listened to radio communications as the most important counterterrorism operation in recent history unfolded. The Indianapolis team struck first, breaching a safe house where 3 operatives were conducting final preparations for their attack on the race. The intelligence we had provided about the building's layout and the operatives' security protocols enabled a surgical assault that resulted in all 3 suspects being captured alive, along with detailed plans and explosives intended for the race. The Washington operation was more complex, requiring coordination with local law enforcement to secure Union Station, while Delta operators apprehended 2 suspects who had been conducting surveillance of the transportation hub. Again, our intelligence about their methods and timing proved accurate, enabling a successful operation with no civilian casualties. The Oklahoma City raid encountered the only significant resistance, when one operative attempted to detonate a suicide vest rather than be captured. Quick action by the assault team prevented the explosion, but the operator who tackled the bomber was seriously wounded in the struggle. By midnight, all 6 primary operatives had been captured or killed, along with numerous support personnel across multiple states. The weapons, explosives, and detailed attack plans recovered during the raids confirmed the intelligence we had developed. The attacks would have been devastating and could have killed thousands of Americans. The immediate aftermath was a blur of debriefings, damage assessments, and coordination with federal agencies. The classified nature of the operation meant that most details couldn't be shared with the public. But senior officials at the highest levels of government were briefed on what had been prevented and who had made it possible. 3 days after the operation, I was summoned to Colonel Hayes's office for what I assumed would be a routine debrief. Instead, I found her with a man in civilian clothes who introduced himself as Deputy Director Morrison from the CIA. "Sergeant First Class Mitchell," Morrison said, "your analytical work during this operation was extraordinary. The precision of your intelligence and the accuracy of your predictions enabled us to prevent what could have been the deadliest terrorist attack on American soil since 9/11. Colonel Hayes added, "The operational commanders have submitted detailed reports crediting your team's analysis as the critical factor in the mission's success. Your leadership and expertise saved American lives on a scale that's difficult to quantify." Morrison continued, "The President has been personally briefed on this operation and the role you played in its success. There will be appropriate recognition for your service, though the classified nature of the mission means that recognition will be limited to those with appropriate clearances." What I didn't understand at the time was that appropriate recognition meant recommendation for the Medal of Honor, the highest award for valor that the United States military can bestow. The recommendation would work its way through multiple levels of review over the coming months, but the foundation had been laid for recognition that would change my life forever. In the immediate aftermath, I was simply grateful that the operation had succeeded and that American lives had been saved. My team had performed flawlessly under enormous pressure, and the trust placed in our analytical capabilities had been vindicated in the most dramatic way possible. But as I reflected on the operation and its significance, I realized that I had finally found the answer to Marcus's persistent question about whether my military service mattered. The work we had done over those 3 weeks had directly prevented mass casualties and protected American families from terrorist attacks. The irony wasn't lost on me that while my own family dismissed my military career as elaborate attention-seeking, I had just completed an operation that would save thousands of other families from experiencing the kind of loss that terrorist attacks inflict. What I couldn't have predicted was that within months, my family's understanding of my service would be dramatically and permanently altered when the President of the United States would personally recognize my role in preventing one of the most significant terrorist threats in American history. The mission was over, but its consequences were just beginning to unfold in ways that would vindicate everything I had sacrificed for my military career and force my family to confront their fundamental misunderstanding of what my service had always meant. 6 months after the counterterrorism operation, I received a phone call that would change everything. Colonel Hayes summoned me to her office with an urgency in her voice that immediately put me on alert. When I arrived, I found her standing behind her desk with an expression I had never seen before, a mixture of pride, excitement, and something approaching awe. "Sarah," she said, using my first name for the first time in our professional relationship, "sit down. I have news that's going to change your life." The formal letter she handed me was on White House letterhead, bearing the presidential seal, and signed by the Commander-in-Chief himself. As I read the words, my hands began to tremble. The President of the United States was awarding me the Medal of Honor for, quote, "conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of life above and beyond the call of duty, for my role in preventing the Memorial Day terrorist attacks. The ceremony will be at the White House in 3 weeks," Colonel Hayes continued. "You're allowed to invite family members and close friends. This is the highest honor our nation can bestow on a service member, Sarah. What you accomplished saved thousands of American lives." The Medal of Honor. I had studied its history during my military education, learning about recipients who had thrown themselves on grenades to save their comrades, who had single-handedly held off enemy assaults, who had performed acts of valor that seemed beyond human capability. And now my name would be added to that distinguished list. The irony of the moment wasn't lost on me. For years, Marcus had mocked my military service, suggesting it was glorified desk work that took me away from family obligations. Now the President himself was recognizing that my desk work had prevented one of the most devastating terrorist attacks in American history. The weeks leading up to the ceremony were a whirlwind of media interviews, security briefings, and preparation for what would be the most significant day of my military career. The White House Protocol Office coordinated every detail, from the guest list to the precise choreography of the ceremony itself. I was allowed to invite 12 guests to witness the ceremony. The decision of whom to include was both obvious and painful. My parents, Emma, and several military colleagues who had supported my career were automatic choices. The question that haunted me was whether to invite Marcus and Rebecca. After much internal debate, I decided to extend the invitation. Whatever our personal conflicts, this moment represented vindication not just of my choices, but of the military service that Dad had introduced me to as a child. I wanted my entire family to witness what their daughter and sister had accomplished, even if they had struggled to understand or support it. The response to my invitations revealed the deep divisions that had developed within my family. Mom and Dad accepted immediately, with Dad's voice breaking as he expressed his pride over the phone. Emma was ecstatic, already planning to document the entire experience for her art portfolio. Marcus's response was delayed and grudging. "I suppose we can rearrange our schedule," he said when he finally called back. "Rebecca has a work conference that week, but she might be able to change it." There was no congratulations, no acknowledgement of the significance of the award, just logistical concerns and implied inconvenience. The ceremony took place on a crisp October morning in the East Room of the White House. As I stood in my dress blue uniform, waiting to be escorted into the room where presidents had made history for over 2 centuries, I felt a surreal sense of completion. Every challenge of my military career, from the first day of basic training to the sleepless nights analyzing terrorist communications, had led to this moment. The East Room was filled with military leadership, government officials, and media representatives. My family sat in the front row, with Mom dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief and Dad sitting ramrod straight in his best suit. Emma had her sketchbook ready, determined to capture every detail of the ceremony. Marcus and Rebecca sat slightly apart from the others, both checking their phones even as the ceremony began. President Harrison entered the room with the dignity and presence that the office demanded. As he approached the podium, the assembled guests rose in respect for both the commander-in-chief and the significance of the moment. "Today," the president began, "we gather to honor an American hero whose actions prevented immeasurable tragedy and saved countless innocent lives. Sergeant First Class Sarah Mitchell exemplifies the finest traditions of military service and the unwavering dedication to protecting our homeland." As he spoke about the classified operation and its significance, I watched my family's faces, particularly Marcus's. For the first time since I had joined the military, he was hearing an authoritative account of what my service actually entailed. The president described the complexity of the intelligence analysis, the precision required to identify terrorist threats, and the life-or-death consequences of the decisions my team had made. Through her exceptional analytical skills and tireless dedication, the president continued, Sergeant Mitchell identified patterns that others had missed, connected intelligence that seemed unrelated, and provided the critical information that enabled our Special Operations Forces to prevent attacks that could have killed thousands of Americans. Marcus's expression was changing as the president spoke. The casual dismissiveness that had characterized his attitude toward my military career was being replaced by something approaching comprehension. Perhaps for the first time, he was understanding that my playing soldier had involved preventing mass casualties on American soil. The formal presentation of the medal was conducted with military precision. As the president placed the Medal of Honor around my neck, he spoke words that I will remember for the rest of my life. "On behalf of a grateful nation, I present you with the Medal of Honor. Your service exemplifies the courage, dedication, and sacrifice that keep America safe." The weight of the medal was significant, but it was nothing compared to the weight of responsibility and recognition it represented. As the president shook my hand, and the assembled guests applauded, I felt years of doubt and family conflict finally resolved. My service had mattered in the most fundamental way possible. I had saved American lives. The reception following the ceremony provided opportunities for my family to interact with senior military officials and government leaders who had worked with me throughout my career. Colonel Hayes spent considerable time with my parents, describing my analytical capabilities and leadership in terms that left no doubt about my professional reputation. "Your daughter is one of the most gifted intelligence analysts I've encountered in 25 years of military service," she told them. "The precision of her work and her ability to see patterns others miss has saved lives in multiple operations. This Medal of Honor recognizes just one example of her exceptional contributions to national security." Emma was in her element, sketching portraits of military officers and asking detailed questions about my career that revealed her genuine pride in my accomplishments. Several generals spent time with her, describing my reputation within the special operations community and the respect I had earned among my peers. But it was Marcus's transformation that was most dramatic. Throughout the reception, he remained uncharacteristically quiet, listening as military leaders described my work with a reverence that made clear this wasn't routine recognition. When one Delta Force commander mentioned that my intelligence had prevented another 9/11, Marcus's face went pale. The drive back to the hotel after the ceremony was conducted in near silence. Finally, Dad spoke, his voice thick with emotion. "Sarah, I always knew you were special, but today I understand what you've been doing all these years. You've been protecting us. Protecting all of us." Mom was crying openly. "I'm so sorry we didn't understand. All those times we worried about you missing family events. We didn't realize you were saving families from losing their loved ones forever." Emma reached over and squeezed my hand. "I'm going to paint this ceremony," she said. "I want to capture what it means for our family, how proud we are of what you've accomplished." Marcus remained silent until we reached the hotel. As we stood in the lobby, he finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sarah, I need to apologize. Not just for my wedding speech, but for years of not understanding what you were doing. I thought your military career was about getting attention, proving you were better than the rest of us." He paused, struggling with words that clearly didn't come easily. "Today I realized that while I've been selling marketing campaigns, you've been preventing terrorist attacks. While I've been worried about quarterly bonuses, you've been saving American lives. I don't know how to make up for years of treating your service like it was somehow selfish or self-serving." The apology was more than I had ever expected from Marcus, but it also came at a cost. Our relationship had been damaged by years of his dismissiveness and active resentment. The Medal of Honor ceremony had forced him to confront the reality of my service, but it couldn't undo the pain his attitude had caused. "Marcus," I said carefully, "I appreciate the apology, but this recognition doesn't change what my service has always been about. I didn't join the military to prove anything to our family. I joined because I felt called to serve something bigger than myself." Over the following months, my family's attitude toward my military career underwent a complete transformation. Mom and Dad began asking detailed questions about my work, expressing pride in ways they never had before. Emma incorporated military themes into her art, creating a series of paintings about service and sacrifice that gained recognition in her graduate program. Marcus's change was more complex. His newfound respect for my service seemed genuine, but it was also accompanied by what appeared to be guilt about his previous behavior. He began overcompensating, constantly praising my military career and telling anyone who would listen about his Medal of Honor sister. The recognition that followed the White House ceremony was overwhelming. Military publications featured my story, veterans organizations invited me to speak, and my hometown planned a parade in my honor. The girl who had left Millbrook feeling isolated from her family was returning as a national hero. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. The memorial wall at the Ronald Reagan Building in Washington, D.C., added a plaque honoring the victims who would have died in the Memorial Day attacks if they had been successful. The plaque included a simple inscription, "In memory of those who lived because others served." Reading those words, I finally understood that the validation I had sought from my family had been unnecessary. My service had been meaningful, not because my family understood it, but because it had protected innocent people from experiencing the kind of loss that terrorist attacks inflict. The relationship with my family improved significantly after the Medal of Honor ceremony, but it was different now, built on respect rather than the unconditional love of childhood. Marcus and I would never fully recover the closeness we had shared as children, but we found a way to coexist as adults who had chosen very different paths. Years later, when people ask me about receiving the Medal of Honor, I tell them it represented the culmination of a journey that began in a small-town hardware store with a father who taught me about service. The recognition was meaningful, but it was the work itself, the lives saved, the attacks prevented, the mission accomplished, that had always provided the real reward. The little girl who had once felt responsible for protecting her younger siblings had grown into a woman whose protection extended to thousands of Americans she would never meet. And that, more than any medal or ceremony, was the true measure of a life spent in service to something greater than herself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.